Chapter 5 A Captive. In the weeks that followed, Halima began to learn the language of the Abaka, turning their odd musical sounds into words like goat and yam, man and woman. As soon as she could string the words together, she told Tumpay, "I am a princess of Kali," and explained that she must be allowed an audience with King Shamari. Tumpay scoffed. "Every captive says she was a prince in her own country. Here you are just a slave, like the rest of us." Word of Halima's claim spread among the other servants, and her mocking nickname quickly became the Princess, as in, "Princess, scrub this pot," or "Princess, go rub the feet of the third wife." Halima was furious at first, but she bit back her anger. She told herself, "I must bide my time. I will have a chance to see the king eventually." And indeed this turned out to be true, although it came about in a way she did not expect. Along with the other women, Halim would go every day down to the river that flowed into the crashing waterfall. There they would wash the clothing of the first wife, Rashida, and the 8 lower wives, and all their children, holding the brightly colored robes over the smooth rocks and letting the swiftly moving water cleanse them. Sometimes the younger children came with their nursemaids to play, splashing each other in the shallow water. Some of the bigger boys would venture farther out and swim in the fast-moving water, but the smaller ones stood prudently close to shore. One, a 9-year-old named Kokoye, meaning summon the people, was the king's son by his 5th wife. He would always hang timidly to his mother's skirts. The others would call to him to join them, making clucking sounds like chicken, but he would refuse, sitting among the washerwomen, shamefacedly. Whenever Halima saw the boy, she would give him a smile of encouragement. She knew what it was like to feel like an outcast. Halima knelt by the riverside, looking at the children play in the sparkling waters, and imagined she heard the gentle surf of the ocean near Kali, where she and her brothers and cousins played. So many of those brave, happy boys were dead now, fallen as men in battle with the Zimbai. She felt tears beginning to well. Brushing them back, she began to sing a sad ballad of her native country. "Death does not sound a trumpet. Death does not sound a trumpet. It comes silent like a snake in the grass. Death does not sound a trumpet. Death does not sound a trumpet. It comes like a coward, like a thief in the night. Death does not sound a trumpet. Death does not sound a trumpet. It is not the crashing waves, but the calm and silent waters that drown a man." First the children, then the serving women began to attend and cluster around Halima as she knelt on the muddy bank singing. When the last note left her lips, there was a moment of silence, and she looked about uncertainly at the wide eyes and purple-black faces. Then the serving women began to clap and smile. They hugged Halima and bade her sing more of the songs of her land. Then they began to sing too and tried to teach Halima the songs of the Abaka. They all laughed and sang together down by the river until almost sunset. The next day, Tumbay told Halima that she had been summoned to the house of the king. Halima gulped. Her time had come indeed, but for what? She readied herself and headed for the tall building. Tiptoeing cat-like, Halima entered the inner chamber of the king's house. As much as the first wife's house was domestic and female, this place oozed masculinity, like a lion's den giving off the scent of its owner. The walls of the room were adorned with the hides of lions and bears, as well as weapons of war of all types. Bows, spears, shields, and swords wrought from iron with fine, intricate designs carved into the hilt. But to her surprise, she saw instruments of learning too, ancient furled scrolls of papyrus and candles to read by, maps depicting the 4 corners of the earth, from the frigid land of the whites to the baking lands of gold in the south, from the land of silk and spices to the east to the green forest across the western ocean. Suddenly, a loud grunt like a boar's erupted from an inner room. Halima jumped, letting out a little girlish shriek. She cautiously approached the next chamber and peeped through the curtains. To her horror, she saw that Shamari was locked in mortal combat with another giant. An assassin, Halima thought. The two giants, dressed only in loincloths and dripping with sweat, were chest to chest, each with his arms braced around the other's back with spine-snapping force. They barreled into one stone wall and then the next, as they staggered about on iron-thewed legs, each trying to toss the other off balance. At one point, the assassin wrapped a long-fingered hand securely around Shamari's throat. He grinned triumphantly. "I must help him," Halima thought, and she looked around for a weapon to throw to the king. But at that moment, in a lightning-fast movement, Shamari snagged his opponent by the wrist, turned, and hurled him over his shoulder. The other giant crashed to the ground with an earth-shaking thud, and the king planted a bare foot on the man's broad chest. The attacker lay panting, the wind knocked out of him. Then, to Halima's surprise, Shamari grinned a gleaming white smile, reached down, and helped the other man to his feet. Now she recognized the young warrior as the one given the praise named Tree Harvester at the feast. "A good fight, Hassani," Shamari said. He tapped his temple with a laugh. "You are learning to use your head as well as your heart." The young warrior, who looked about 18, gripped the king's thick arm. "It will be a long time before I can best the lion that walks on two legs, father," he said. So this was the king's son, Halima realized, now feeling a little foolish. The king had been teaching him how to wrestle. Halima smelled a whiff of musky perfume and saw that two busty servant girls had drawn up silently beside her. The two were sisters and nearly identical. Shamari turned to his son. "Come, join me in a massage. You've earned it today." The young man bowed his head. "Thank you, father, but mother has asked me to build a fence in her fields today." Shamari smiled. "Good boy. Though say no to your mother once in a while. You must learn to refuse the demands of women, or you'll make a henpecked husband some day." "Yes, father," the young man said. He turned to go. Hassani strode by Halima, stealing an appreciative glance at the girl. The king noticed Halima standing in the doorway for the first time, and his warm, bemused smile returned. "Is this the child they say sings so sweetly?" "Yes, sire," said one of the servant girls. Halima was incensed. True, she was tiny next to the two towering servants, but she didn't like being taken for a little girl. She was 15. "I'm not a child," she spoke up. The king raised his eyebrows, and Halima realized how petulant she sounded. The two servant girls looked at each other in shock, and then one quickly said, "Forgive her poor manners, sire. She's an outlander, new to our country." "Hunters brought her here as a gift," added the other girl. "I see," Shamari said, smiling at Halima again. "You must make her welcome, then." "Yes, sire," the servant girls said in unison. "Come," Shamari said. He spun around and strode toward a stone bench set against the wall, covered with velvet cushions. As the king walked off, he unfastened his loincloth and let it drop. Halima stared with fascination at his bare, sweat-gleaming buttocks, as brawny as a young lion's. She quickly lowered her gaze to her own feet in maidenly shame. She didn't dare look at the front side of him. When she finally raised her head, the king had stretched out face down on the velvet cushions. One of the servant girls hovered over him and, tilting a flask, poured a glob of oil between his shoulder blades. Halima watched the river of oil run down his back, down the curve of his spine. One servant girl began to knead the oil into Shamari's sweaty back, which looked to Halima as broad as an elephant's. The other servant girl lit a stick of incense, then took out a little finger harp and knelt beside the king. Beginning to pluck it, she gestured to Halima to come forward. "Come, Halima, it pleases the king that you should sing for him." Halima cleared her throat and began to sing, haltingly at first, and then in a fine, sweet, clear voice. "When love comes, it is not like two worlds meeting, or raindrops that fall and merge in the sky. When love comes, it is not like two roads meeting. It is a journey deep into an undiscovered land. When love comes, it is not like two roads meeting, but the taming of each wild heart by the other. When love comes, it is not like two roads meeting." Shamari became attentive to the song and looked up, frowning curiously. "Does she displease you, sire?" one of the servant girls asked in alarm. Shamari clapped his hands and pointed at the two servant girls. "Go," he commanded. The tall girls bowed humbly and scampered off. He looked sternly at Halima. "Come," he said. Halima stepped quickly forward and knelt, head lowered. She swayed uncertainly. The aroma of the frankincense, which now clouded the room, was dizzying. The king rested his chin on his fist and considered her soberly. Then he smiled. "No, you are not a child," he declared. "There's all the wisdom of the ages in you. I've never heard any song so strange and beautiful. I must have you sing for me again. It cures my melancholy." "Yes, sire," Halima said. "Sing again now, that your soothing voice may help me sleep," he commanded, resting his head back down on the pillow. Halima commenced another ballad, but then she wondered if she should ask him now. She summoned her courage and spoke. "Sire?" Shamari, drifting off, grunted. "Sire, I have a favor to ask." The king opened one eye and turned to her. Halima pointed to the sea turtle-shaped pendant that hung about her neck. "Sire, I am a princess of the land of Kali. If you return me to my home, my father Babatunde the Good will pay you a handsome ransom. This I promise." Shamari rolled on his side to take a good look at her. As the giant turned, Halima could glimpse his manhood, stretched out along the slab on which he lay. There was enough of it to put a bull elephant to shame. She forced herself to concentrate instead on the king's scrutinizing gaze. Shamari ran his hand over his jaw in mock contemplation. "Well, princess, before I send a ransom, I need time to decide what you are worth, and whether I'm willing to give you up." So it was that Halima, as a captive of the Abaka, the giants of the Silver Mountain, became a singer for their ruler Shamari, whose name means forceful. Every day she was summoned to entertain him, to sing and regale him with stories from her land, from childhood tales of Anansi the spider to her people's history, drummed into her by the family's griot, Mendefali. He was fascinated by the great learning of the people of Kali, and would ask her many questions about the world beyond his mountain kingdom. What Halima liked best was when the tales she told amused him, and he would let out a deep bellow like a lion's roar. About this time, Tumpe informed Halima she was to assist Kiza, a skinny, buck-toothed girl with a sullen disposition, in caring for Rashida's prized silk dresses. The two would find themselves carefully scrubbing the queen's garments down by the river long after the other women had left, anxious to neither leave a single stain on the clothes or accidentally rip them. This was in addition to her other duties, such as squatting on the ground cracking nuts brought in by the basketful by Shamari's sons and nephews. However, the added chores only made Halima's visits to the king sweeter. She would scrub until her fingers ached and were as wrinkled as prunes, all the time looking forward to her daily audience with Shamari. One day, as Halima knelt beside the king, singing a song of her native land, Shamari stopped her and pointed to an errant tear rolling down her cheek. "What is it, pretty Halima? Why do you weep?" Halima shook her head, as if it were nothing. The king knelt beside her. "Do you miss your homeland?" Halima nodded reluctantly. "Do you wish me to return you to the land of your father?" asked the king. Halima looked up in surprise and flicked away the tear. Shamari looked entirely serious. "If that is what you want, I will order it, wise, beautiful Halima," he rumbled gently. "You have given me so much joy in the past few weeks. I owe happiness to you as well, and there will be no ransom demanded. But first, I have something to show you. Your land by the sea is not the only place of beauty that the Great One of the Sky has created." He stood and took her by the hand, gently lifting her to her feet. They walked out of the king's house and out of his compound, out among his proud, tall people who shouted greetings full of praise. Young children clustered around them, and old men smiled broad, toothless smiles. He took her into the holy grove where the royal ancestors were buried, each king buried in the base of a baobab tree. The grove looked out over the green, majestic mountainside. "Our people were the first men. It was our kind who stole fire from the heavens. It was we who first sailed to the western continent and first understood the meaning of the stars. Halima felt an urge to protest. In the legends told by her family griot, Wendepoli, it was the ancestors of her own people who discovered those things. She held her tongue and listened politely. We too had our golden age, continued Shamari, but as in the way of empires, folly and petty jealousy brought us down. Our people are now splintered, just as the mountain is splintered. He pointed to far-off villages that peppered the mountainside, separated by enormous gorges. We are a dozen kingdoms on this mountain now. One year, one of those kingdoms is our ally. The next, it may be our enemy. Halima remembered the victory feast, which she knew had followed a battle. So it is your own race that you war against? You slaughter your own kind? She asked. Shamari looked at her in surprise. When we make war, it is only to steal cattle and raid granaries, and sometimes to take captives for our wives and servants. If we can do that without ever harming our enemies, then all the better. That seems a strange, peaceful way to make war, Lima said, shaking her head. It is the way we have known for 1,000 years. What other way is there? Halima lectured him. When great kingdoms battle, it is to conquer the enemy and destroy them completely. That is the way civilized countries wage war. Shamari looked at her for a moment and laughed, a deep, hearty guffaw that rang out over the mountain. Halima almost stamped her feet in dismay. What have I said that is so funny, she thought. Sometimes he insists on treating me like a child. Shamari settled down, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. He took her hand and looked at her seriously. I think you and I have much to teach each other, little one. Halima smiled. Then she said boldly, In our land, we have great mathematicians and priests and astronomers. What do you have here that is as marvelous? Shamari turned around and, standing beside her, pointed out at the very peak of the mountain. Up there lives Oloshigan, our greatest seer, who has lived 200 years. He sees with the third eye, a vision unclouded by human folly and petty feelings. He can see deep into the past and far into the future. And you've met this wondrous man? Halima asked skeptically. Not yet. My father told me of him. Only for the greatest decisions does the king consult Oloshigan, when even the great wisdom of the council of elders with which a king rules is not enough. Halima stared at the mountain peak, which glittered like diamonds, trying to believe him. Sensing her doubt, Shamar explained, Here in the mountains, more things are possible, Halima. This high, the air is different. The mind is freer here, the soul more naked. Can't you feel it? Halima shut her eyes and leaned back against Shamari. She sucked in the pure, rarefied air. It tasted cool and fresh as spring water. Yes, she admitted. This is a place where truth is clearer, and passion stronger, where hate is great hate and love is great love. Shamari stood close behind her and put his hands at her waist. Halima, wise, beautiful Halima, I do not want you to go, he murmured. He turned her head toward his and placed his lips over hers. Halima felt her moist lips melt into his as he overwhelmed her with a deep, passionate kiss. When she could breathe again, she moaned in protest, In our country, we do not touch our lips this way. Shamari smiled. Much to teach each other, he whispered. The following day, Rashida appeared at the riverside where Halima, Tumpe, Kiza, and other women knelt to wash clothes on the rocks. The first wife's face was like a hurricane. Halima shivered as she recalled all the people who had witnessed her out walking with the king. What gossip had the first wife heard? Rashida held up her most prized silk dress, almost triumphantly. Halima saw that, though it was bright red and clean, it was ruined by an ugly tear that split it almost in half. Who is responsible for this? Rashida demanded. Kiza stood up hurriedly and pointed at Halima. It was she, the one who calls herself princess. That's not true, Halima protested vehemently, trying in confusion to recall the last time she'd seen the dress. Would you take the word of an outlander over a woman born of the Abaka? Insisted gangling, buck-toothed Kiza. She pointed accusingly at Halima. I saw her rend it on purpose. She said that because she's a princess, the garment was hers by right. She vowed that if she couldn't have it, no one would. I heard these words with my very own ears. Big Tumpe lumbered to her feet and protested. The ugly one lies out of jealousy, Your Highness. Like as not, she tore it herself by accident. You saw nothing, Kiza spat. Tumpe fell into frustrated silence. Rashida gave Halima a look that could have bored straight through lead. I think it's time the princess learned her true station here, she said quietly. In the queen's house, Halima was made to lay face forward over her stool and to receive 50 strokes of the stick on her bare buttocks. She wasn't terrified. No one had ever dared strike her before, even in play, so she could not truly anticipate the pain. Rashida stood behind her with Tumpe, who held a long, thin stick in her hand. Begin, she ordered calmly. Tumpe whispered, Cry out, confess, Halima, and beg for forgiveness. But Halima refused to cry out. She refused to give the first wife the satisfaction of watching her plead for mercy. She heard the switch whistle through the air, and then it bit into her flesh like a barracuda. She winced at the pain. In her father's palace, she had once had a servant beaten for stealing. She had no idea it hurt this much. Still, Halima would not cry out. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to count the strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. By the 10th stroke, tears were rolling down her cheeks, and her backside felt as if it had been stung by 1,000 ants. She was ready to grovel at the first wife's feet and beg for mercy, but she did not. 12, 13, 14, she counted to herself, clenching her teeth so tightly it felt like they might shatter. Then, abruptly, Rashida commanded Tumpe to stop. Leave us, she ordered. Tumpe gladly dropped the switch, and with a look of concern for Halima, backed out of the room. Halima knelt, head bowed, sheltering her breasts with her arms. Her sweating body shuddered, still waiting for the next blow. Rashida paced several times around her, then came to a stop directly in front of her. Look at me, the Queen of the Abaka commanded. Halima tilted her head up and met Rashida's steely gaze defiantly. Rashida nodded to herself. So, you are a princess. You are too proud to cry out and show your pain. Rashida bent down and put her hand against Halima's tear-soaked face. She considered her almost tenderly. You are indeed beautiful, Halima. I think I've never seen a face so perfect. Is that why he loves you? Because your skin is young and soft? Or is there more? What is it he sees in you, she demanded. What in you? Halima knelt, looking at her in silence. The queen's nostrils twitched like a leopard about to spring. Halima knelt, looking up at her in silence. The queen's nostrils twitched like a leopard about to spring. You are a captive and a slave, Rashida said. I could have you taken to the forest and thrown to the lions. I could have you thrown from the highest waterfall. Halima continued to meet her eyes steadily. Rashida clenched and unclenched her fists again and again, and her eyes burned. She is mad, Halima told herself. She is about to pound me to death with her bare hands. But Rashida shook her head vigorously and stood, straightening up, taking on a queenly bearing again. But I am the queen of the Abaka, she said stiffly, and you are an innocent. She walked to the door where she turned. I will not beat you again, Halima. I will send a messenger to the king of Akali and tell him you are safe among us. Later, Halima lay on her belly on a mat of woven rush in the room she shared with Tumpe. The older woman was rubbing hot, soothing palm oil into her beet-red backside, draining away the sting of her beating. The servant woman's broad, coarse hands felt as big as a man's, and Halima guiltily found herself imagining that it was Shamari comforting her. Why am I thinking about him now? Halima asked herself. Now that word is being sent to my father, I will be going home soon, never to see him again. Up to this moment she had dreamed every night of returning home. Now, though, the thought of leaving made her strangely melancholy, despite her terrible beating. "Tumpe," she asked idly, "do captive women ever marry into a family of the Abaka?" "Of course," Tumpe replied, continuing to massage her, "with the permission of the man's other wives." "Even an outlander?" Tumpe told her. "First the outlander must be initiated into our clan. It is a complex ritual, not often done." She lifted her hands. "Now tell me, child, who is it you want to marry?" "No one," Halima answered hurriedly. Tumpe snorted in disbelief. "I shall give you a few more licks of the stick to cure you of lying." Strangely, in the weeks and months that followed, no word came from the king of Kali, Babatunde the Good. Indeed, the two messengers who were dispatched by Rashida never returned, nor were they ever seen again in life. Halima might almost have doubted that the message was ever sent, but Tumpe told her she'd seen them leave with her own eyes at early dawn. One night, Halima had a strange, troubling dream. She was on the seashore near Kali, skipping stones across the water, when she saw a black-cloaked figure treading along the surf. She called to the figure, but there was no reply. He continued to walk away. She approached the figure, who, she could see now, was her father. She called to him, but he kept on trudging away. Halima ran toward him, but no matter how fast she ran, the sand held her in place. Babatunde turned to her and smiled sadly, then waved. Tears were running down his face, red tears of blood. He turned somberly and marched into the dark, gloomy sea. When Halima awoke, she shared the unsettling dream with Tumpe. "Perhaps it means your past life is dead. Your future is here with us," the servant woman told her, putting a fat, comforting arm around her. The more time passed with no word from Kali, the more the idea of marriage to Shamari captivated the young maiden's imagination. He was, she felt with all her heart, the lion among men that her seer had prophesied would become her husband. He was brave, wise, and kind, everything good a man could be. If the people of Kali needed an alliance through marriage with a warrior people, here was a warrior race unequaled, certainly a much better choice than the people of the Snake and their pudgy, weak-armed leader, King Al-Badi. With each passing day, she and Shamari became closer, and she was sure that any day the king would ask her to become his 10th wife. One morning she was ordered to come to the king's house. She'd never been summoned to see him so early in the day. Something must be up, she thought. Tingling with excitement, she bathed thoroughly, perfumed her body with sweet-scented leaves, and wrapped herself in her prettiest dress. Then she hurried to the king's house. She was told to wait in the outer chamber. Through the silk curtains, she could hear the voices of Rashida and Shamari. Halima knew it was wrong to eavesdrop on a private conversation between a husband and wife, but it was impossible not to overhear every word standing where she'd been ordered. Rashida said, "Husband, do you not think it is time for our eldest son, Hassani, to take a wife?" Yes, Shamari replied. "He is a warrior now, a tall, straight young man. He has passed all the tests of manhood." "I think, husband, I have the perfect choice for him." "Indeed?" "She is a creature of perfect beauty, with a pleasing, gentle temperament, and wise beyond her years." "I thought I'd taken the last of those when I married you, Rashida." Halima wondered which of the village girls had been chosen as Hassani's bride. The tree harvester was considered quite a catch. She would have a good piece of gossip to share with Tumpe and the others. "Shall I summon her, husband?" Rashida asked. Shamari must have nodded because there was a loud smack as Rashida clapped her hands. "Halima!" she called sharply. Halima stood frozen in utter disbelief, like a gazelle startled by bright lights. "Halima!" Rashida called again. Halima passed through the curtains and into the inner chamber. Shamari and Rashida were seated side by side on stools. At his mother's foot their son Hassani knelt. The handsome young man's eyes lit up as Halima entered the room. He jumped up, rushed to her side, and took her by the arm, leading her into the room. Shamari's brow knitted as he saw Halima. Rashida turned to him. Do they not make a handsome couple, husband? For once, Shamari was speechless. He stared from Halima to Hassani, and then from Hassani to Halima. When he did speak, his voice was hoarse. Hassani, son, do you wish to take this woman as your bride? Hassani turned to Halima and looked at her head to toe. He met her eyes and his face stirred with passion. This boy looks like he wants to take me right here on the floor, Halima thought indignantly. Hassani grinned with a smile uncannily like his father's. Father, she is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, he said. Shamari slumped slightly in his stool. For the first time he looked old to Halima. He turned slowly to her. And you, Halima? Their eyes locked. You know my answer, Halima thought. She wanted to throw herself at his feet and declare her love. Rashida interjected. She is a captive, husband. We do not need to ask for permission. You can give her away to any man of your choice. You are, as her father, here. Shamari frowned, and he stroked his jaw thoughtfully. Softly he said, Hassani, Halima, leave us. We will tell you our decision. His son grinned and bowed. Thank you, father. He took Halima's hand and led her out of the chamber. As soon as they were in the outer chamber, Halima yanked her hand angrily free from Hassani. His bright smile faded as he saw her expression. Don't be frightened, he whispered. I will never mistreat you. He ducked down awkwardly and gave her a shy peck on the cheek. Then he stepped back, bowed to her, and smiled diffidently. The moment he left, Halima fell to her knees by the doorway. Now she was eavesdropping brazenly, but how could she help it? This was her future they were deciding. She felt like a child listening in on her parents. What is the matter, husband? Rashida asked. Does the maiden not meet with your approval? She is of noble birth, a princess in her own country. You know that I have feelings for this girl. For the bride of your son? Rashida exclaimed in a shocked tone. Shamari's voice became stern. This guile is beneath you, Rashida. There was a moment of silence. Halima could glimpse through the gauzy curtain that both were standing, and that Shamari had put his hands on his wife's shoulders. Rashida cast her eyes down, refusing to look at him. The king told her, I wish to make Halima my wife. I wish to make her part of our family. I want you to give me your permission for this. Rashida continued to look down. Are we not happy as we are, husband? Yes, dear one. Have I not chosen for you 8 wives, each more beautiful than the last, and sent them to your bed? Have I for one moment shown jealousy toward them? Shamari shook his head. Rashida continued, her voice rising in pitch. Have I not given you strong sons? Have I not stood by your side through famine and war and illness, through the death of our parents and kin? Rashida nodded solemnly. Rashida finally glared up at him. Then what do you want from this outlander? Shamari took his hands from Rashida's shoulders and paced across the room, groping for words. Then he smiled to himself as if picturing Halima before him. She is like a spring day, he said. Rashida sighed in exasperation. Shamari made a gesture with his hands as if beckoning for understanding. Rashida, I am king of a country that has not grown for 1,000 years. One day is like the next. We live out our father's past like ghosts, like the living dead, like one's asleep. And I am king, but I'm powerless to change anything. Sometimes I feel like the most asleep of all. But she is like a spark that ignites me. She brings me to life. When I am with her, I am young again, a king who could forge a golden age. His rhapsody was wasted on Rashida, who cried out bitterly, And what about me? What about Rashida, your first wife? Shamari smiled. You will always be the first wife. Rashida shook her head, frowning. Shamari stepped closer and hugged her reassuringly. You will always be my first wife, Rashida. You were my first bride, and you will always be first in my heart. Do you swear? Rashida said fiercely. I swear it, Shamari declared. She embraced him tightly. Halima watched Shamari kiss her as passionately as he had kissed Halima herself in the sacred grove. The two stood, swaying, holding each other. Rashida whispered, with obvious reluctance, "Husband, if it is your will, I will put the question to the lesser wives. If they do not object, neither shall I." "Thank you, dear one," Shamari said, kissing her throat. "Now, make love to your first wife, like you did on our wedding night." Shamari grinned and drew her to him. Halima slipped out of the king's house and rushed out of the compound. She had always prided herself on her sober wisdom, but now her passions were running riot. She recalled a story Nima had told her of a doe-eyed woman in her village by the sea. This woman would lie with any man, even the husbands of other wives. She was not wicked, but when passion seized her, she would be unthinking, like a lioness in heat. In time, the women of the village banded together and took their complaints to the village council, demanding punishment. The doe-eyed woman was taken deep into the forest and abandoned. Seasons later, husbands found her bones, gnawed by lions. Halima felt like that wanton, doe-eyed woman now, like a fishing village trollop chasing another woman's husband. She sensed the great love between Rashida and Shamari, and to break such a bond would be the greatest evil. She knew it would be fairer to withdraw and refuse the king's hand. "All my life I've been fair and good," Halima thought. "I've been taught to be noble and to sacrifice my wishes for the welfare of the many. I agreed to marry fat King Alabadi to save my people from the Zambai. I surrendered myself to bondage to save the lives of my servants. But this time, great one in the sky, forgive me. I am too weak. I cannot sacrifice. I must be with him." She craved Shamari as a drunkard craved wine. She craved him in her heart and in her loins and in her spirit. Weeping and confused, Halima wandered down to the river. She clambered onto a boulder and steered into the bright, chuckling waters. In the distance, she could hear the faint rumbling of the falls like distant thunder. "I feel like throwing myself right off the cliffs," she said morosely. The women were washing now. She could hear them singing a few hundred yards away. The familiar sound soothed her soul. She reached into the frigid water and splashed some on her face, trying to cool her passion. She fought to calm herself and prayed for guidance. "It is out of my hands," she reminded herself. "The lesser wise will decide it." Then she imagined Rashida putting the question to the group. "Our husband wants a new wife, a vixen who's younger and more beautiful than any of us. How many vote for her?" Yes, somehow the evil witch would tilt the vote against her, while pretending to be neutral in the matter. What's more, 2 of Rashida's co-wives were her younger sisters. Another was a cousin. No doubt she handpicked them to give herself greater strength in the king's compound. "I will never be allowed to marry my beloved Shamari," she thought in dismay. Suddenly, Halima's deep reverie was shattered by a woman's scream, followed by a chorus of high-pitched shrieks. It was coming from a river where the cheerful singing had abruptly stopped. Halima hopped off the boulder. She'd lived her life by the water and knew the sound only too well. Someone was drowning. She hurried up the riverbank and rounded a curve, hopping as quickly as she could from one slippery stone to the next. Ahead, Halima could see a cluster of women holding one another, screeching at such a volume that their words were unintelligible. Several others were wailing and pointing out into the river. Kiza and Tumpe and 2 other women were wrestling back the king's 5th wife, who was desperately trying to plunge into the river. "My baby! My baby!" the 5th wife wailed. Out in the middle of the river, a young boy thrashed and choked, one hand clinging to a slender branch as the current spun him around and around. He was hollering for help at the top of his lungs. Weeping, Tumpe told Halima, "It is Kukoyi, son of Shamari. He wanted to prove his courage to the children. They said he was afraid to swim." "He can't die!" the 5th wife screamed at the sky in absolute hysteria. "It is the Great One's will," Kiza said, trying to comfort her. Halima took an anxious step toward the river. Where were the men to come rescue the boy? There were none in sight. She knew they would come, but too late. She hesitated, then unfastened her dress and sprang head first into the river. In her days in the kingdom of Calais, the great port city by the sea, she had become a confident and expert swimmer. She plowed through the water toward the drowning lad with the speed of a porpoise. Though the sky overhead gleamed with sunlight, the water was stabbing cold. Naked except for her loincloth, she felt like she was swimming through ice. When she felt she must be near the boy, she pulled her head out of the water. She saw him nowhere. No, has he already slipped under? Then she heard again his frantic cries and saw him many yards away. The powerful current was dragging him downriver. Halima ducked her head back into the water and took off after the boy. Kicking furiously, driving forward with all the force her young legs could muster, she could hear the women wailing on the shore, crying out and beseeching the Great One in the sky to be merciful. Halima yanked her head out of the water. This time, the little boy was only a few yards away. Halima felt a rush of relief. The relief was short-lived, because suddenly she became aware of the thunderous roar of the falls, growing louder every moment. They had already drifted dangerously far downstream. Halima splashed toward the boy, flung out a hand, and grabbed hold of the tree branch that he clung to. She grabbed him so that his small bare chest flattened her bosom. The little boy wrapped his arms tightly around her neck. "Thank you," Kakaye said through chattering teeth. Embracing him, she began to kick with her long, straight limbs toward the shore. She could feel the strength of the current whipping her and the boy faster and faster down the river. No ocean waves could have prepared her for force such as this. Out of the corner of her eyes, she could see some of the women chasing them along the shore, their screams now drowned out by the roar of the falls. "Great One in the sky, protect us," she thought. She kicked hard for the shore, fatigue starting to set in. She felt young Kokoye rising in her arms, trying to push her away. "Is he panicking now?" she thought. "Let go of me," young son spluttered. "Save yourself." That brave flourish made her hug him all the harder. They were only 100 feet from the falls now, and still nearly in the middle of the river. Halima continued to kick furiously with all her strength, but that was nothing against the raging might of the river. The water was all white, angry foam now. All Halima could see in her mind's eye was the awful 400-foot drop ahead. "Everyone must die, but please, not like that," a voice inside her head shrieked. It was impossible to swim now. Together, she and little Kokoye rushed through the water, clinging to each other as they hurtled toward the abyss. The current raked them over submerged boulders in the shallow water near the waterfall. Halima felt a bone-snapping pain as her ankle bashed into one. For an instant they swirled around in a whirlpool as the currents toyed merrily with them. Desperately, Halima lunged for the jagged peak of the boulder that jutted above the water. Miraculously, she caught it and hugged the boulder with all her might, keeping the boy in front of her. She praised the Great One in the sky for the moment's reprieve. She could feel the power of the waterfall yanking at her like an octopus. Her arms felt as though they were being ripped from their sockets. The falls were deafening, and the water tore along her body like ravenous teeth. Her loincloth was ripped clean away, all the jewelry shorn from her wrists, ankles, and ears. All but the sea turtle pendant. Halima's hands gripped the rock with white knuckles, her fingers losing some of their strength every second. She clung with all her will, knowing that to let go would mean being swept over the falls to die. Her grip was failing. "Great One in the sky, save us!" she screamed above the roar of the waterfall. Her hands were numb now. The left tore away from the rock, and then the right let loose, and she and the boys whooshed away from the boulder. "So this is how it ends," Halima thought in horror. Just then, Halima felt strong hands at her armpits. She felt herself being hoisted out of the water, so she hugged Kokoye as tight as she could, bringing him with her. She was dragged into a canoe. Her rescuer was Hassani, the king's son. Another young man in the canoe was backpedaling furiously. As she and the boy flopped to the bottom of the canoe like big wet fish, Hassani began to paddle for shore. The two youths threw their backs into the strokes, moving their arms at breakneck speed. But it was too late. The current swept the canoe toward the waterfall. The little boat shot toward the precipice, riding on top of the foaming water. The canoe rocked this way and that as it bumped over the rocks, and then finally the bow shot over the waterfall. Halima looked down into the rocky, churning hell 400 feet below. She buried the little boy's face against her bosom, shielding him from the sight, and let out an animal howl of terror. For an instant, the canoe paused in mid-flight, ready to dive headlong over the falls, and then suddenly, fantastically, the boat was jerked back into the river. Only now did Halima see that the canoe was tethered to a long rope that stretched to the shore. There, knee-deep in the icy water, Shamari stood, with the rope tied about his waist. The muscles of his arms rippled as, hand over hand, he pulled the canoe surely back from the brink. An ordinary man would have been hauled into the river himself, but Shamari stood his ground against the raging river, his legs planted as solidly as the pillars of a temple. As soon as she saw him, Halima knew they were safe. For even if the strength of his arms were not enough, his unbending will would not let them perish. Slowly he pulled them back to shore. Moments later, he was joined by 3 or 4 other men who ran down to the river to assist. Together they brought the canoe ashore. The women of the city rushed to help Halima from the canoe and quickly wrapped her in a blanket, covering her nakedness. Her whole body shook, and her teeth clicked together so hard it felt as if her jaw was about to drop off. Still bawling, the 5th wife grabbed Kakoi out of the canoe. She embraced him and then drew back and smacked him on the top of the head. "Who told you could swim, eh?" she demanded. Then she embraced him again. "I'm sorry, Mother," the little boy said calmly. Shamari proudly hugged Hassani and clapped the other canoeist on the back. Then he turned and strode toward Halima. He seemed to take an eternity to reach her, as if he were wading through haze. Halima felt a weakness in her limbs, then a sudden dizziness. As he approached, smiling from ear to ear, his wives crowded around Halima, praising her for her bravery. Just before Shamari reached her, the 1st wife stepped between them. Halima's knees suddenly gave way, but Rashida caught her. She looked into Halima's eyes gravely. She paused, then said, "You've saved the life of our son. My family owes you a life." Rashida turned and told her 8 co-wives, "Sisters, from this day forward, Halima is no longer a slave of the Abaka. She is a free woman. Our husband and Lord Shamari has asked for our consent to marry Halima, and now we must give it. Now we must call her sister." She bent and kissed Halima gently on the cheek. Each of the other wives came up and did the same. Surrounding them, the servant women cheered and clapped. Shamari pushed through the crowd and hugged the sulking girl, then hugged his other wives to him, and then the 2 sons, whose lives had nearly been lost. He threw back his head and gave a shout of joy and praise to the Great One in the sky. So it was that Halima, Princess of Kali, the kingdom by the sea, came to be betrothed to Shamari, king of the giants of the mountain.